The guard leaned in like a priest and whispered, "Sir, I saw your son tip a vial into your glass." Lantern light trembled over the linen, and for a second the stem of my orange juice looked like a fuse. I didn't blink. I've launched products in storms and buried friends in quieter rooms. I know when the air changes. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Parkview Terrace, New York City, Wednesday night, late September. My victory dinner. I'd signed a clean cash term sheet the day before. $43 million for the company I built across 3 decades of missed weekends. I ordered 1 glass of Rioja for the toast and 1 orange juice for my cardiologist. Chris and Laia were on the dance floor, swaying to a quartet that made ordinary people look cinematic. I watched my son's hand at her waist and thought, for the first time in months, about sleep. "Don't drink from that glass again," the guard said, touching the badge at his belt. "Small vial. Clear cap." His voice had the calm of men who tell the truth for a living. The napkin under my palm felt suddenly like a witness. I nodded once, because panic wastes oxygen and I'm 68. I conserve what matters. I have carried a pill bottle in my inside pocket since my wife taught me to respect lists and medicine caps. I slid it out under the tablecloth, tipped an ounce of juice into the plastic, and screwed the lid tight until it squeaked. The rest I poured into the fern beside the rail, the way a fidgeting old man waters something to keep his hands busy. The plant drank our secret. The glass sat empty and sweating, innocent as a lie that hasn't been asked a question yet. Chris and Laia drifted back glowing. He glanced at the glass the way gamblers glance at doors. "Thirsty tonight?" he said, too light. "Beautiful song," I answered, and raised the Rioja for show, my mouth finding only air. I paid in cash, old habit when I want the night to end at my choosing, and kissed the air next to Laia's cheek. I hugged my son, a fraction too long, because I wanted to remember the shape of him before the room finished telling me who he was. "You two stay," I said. "Big day!" "I'm tired." The quartet slid into something slow as a falling curtain. Outside, the September wind had the temperature of decisions. At the corner, I called my building. "This is Daniel Mercer in 24A. Remove my son from the access list. If he shows up, call me first and call security." The concierge didn't ask why. Professionalism is a kind of mercy. In the elevator, I stared at the pill bottle under the yellow light. Vitamin C hand label from a week ago, now holding something far less generous. At my door, I turned every lock and listened to each one answer. In the kitchen, I cleared the counter, set the bottle beneath a lamp, and watched the liquid glow a soft, ordinary orange. Poison often dresses like breakfast. I took out a legal pad and wrote a list in blunt block letters: lab, lawyer, locks. I underlined lab twice and checked the clock. Too late for anything but breathing. I emptied the fridge of anything already open, because caution looks a lot like ritual when you're alone. The trash bag knotted with a sound that felt like a small verdict. Then I sat at the dining table we bought in 1994, when $300 felt brave, and I let the question stand in front of me without makeup. If my son shook that vial, how long has he been practicing the smile? The city outside my windows moved in light and shadow, not names. I placed the bottle in a small travel safe, photographed it on the table with tonight's receipt, and slid the photo to a folder I titled, with one careful word, "If morning would come with white lights and signatures." Tonight I rehearsed the only sentence that mattered. "I want facts first." The guard leaned in like a priest and whispered, "Sir, I saw your son tip a vial into your glass." That sentence played in my head all night like a record stuck in the same groove. I sat in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the pill bottle with its ounce of orange liquid glowing like a warning beacon. If my own boy had really done this, then every smile, every handshake, every "love you, Dad," was a rehearsal for tonight's performance. I poured 2 fingers of scotch, but let the glass just sit there, sweating like I was. I didn't drink it. My mind started flipping back through the years, like receipts stuffed in a drawer. Chris calling me in 1987, asking me to cover rent. Me co-signing his first car loan in '92, wiring him 50 grand in 2004 when he swore he had a business plan that could change the game. Each memory felt less like love and more like installments on a debt that was never mine to begin with. By dawn, I had made my choice. On Thursday, September 25th, 5:40 a.m., I walked into a private lab on 57th Street. They carried the pill bottle in a brown envelope like it was scripture. "Full chain of custody," I told the chemist, and my voice cracked when I said it. She labeled, sealed, logged, each step calm as if she did this every day. Maybe she did. From there I called Rachel, my attorney. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, what happened?" "Start with facts," she told me, her voice firm like she knew panic wastes oxygen. By mid-morning, she had a plan. Escrow the entire $43 million sale by day's end. Revoke my outdated power of attorney, freeze the so-called trusted party bank permissions Chris had slipped in last year, and prepare updated beneficiary forms. At the bank, a private banker tried to smile while admitting that since 2023, any transfer over $5 million required confirmation by the trusted party, my son. I clenched the phone so tight it squeaked. Rachel's letter rescinded that within the hour, and I left the branch with a cashier's check and hands shaking from rage, not age. I tried not to think about it, but the truth kept pressing down. If that drug had reached my bloodstream, combined with my anticoagulants, I might have been on a slab right now, with Chris and Laia already rehearsing their grief. At 4:20 p.m., the lab called. The voice on the line was careful. We detected a short-acting benzodiazepine. Also traces consistent with anticoagulant interaction, not a prank, not a mistake. A plan. I set the phone down, looked at the safe where the pill bottle now sat sealed, and whispered to myself, if he wanted me gone, then I'll plan him back into his place. Tomorrow would not be about grief. Tomorrow would be about survival. Justice starts as a grocery list, affidavits, stamps, signatures. I woke on Friday with the kind of clarity that follows an insult you finally name. The city smelled like coffee and decision. At 9 a.m., I met Rachel in her office on Lexington. She poured coffee that tasted like business and handed me a pen. "We open attorney escrow this morning," she said, sliding a form across the desk. Her pen moved in the kind of cursive that makes promises enforceable. I signed the escrow agreement for the sale proceeds and watched the pen make the word irrevocable look smaller than it really was. Escrow meant the money could not be walked into by anyone at a whim. It meant my life, my choices had a legal fence. We drafted a new revocable trust in my wife's memory. I insisted on an independent trustee, someone outside family circles, someone with a backbone. Rachel suggested a woman who ran a hospital endowment and didn't confuse kindness with softness. "Not family," I said. "Not friend," she initialed the clause. At 11:15 a.m., we went to Parkview Terrace, not to eat, but to collect what mattered. Mr. Riley met us in a quiet side office with the polite, exacted way of a man used to being believed. He handed Rachel a paper he'd already written, a sworn statement of what he'd seen the night before, the clear-capped vial, the tilt of my son's wrist, the angle from which he observed the table. He described it as if he were drawing a map. I watched him sign his own name and felt for the first time in a day less alone. The manager gave us a thumb drive with the footage. Rachel and I handled it like evidence, not stories. Chain of custody matters in courtrooms and in truth. She logged receipt of the drive, printed a form, and wrote Mr. Riley's name under witness. The word affidavit felt good to see again. Then we went downtown to the bank. I watched a clerk stamp paper with a medallion guarantee, the green circular press that feels like a small, old-world authority. The bank clerk handed me the stamped bank slip, and I tucked it into my wallet like a talisman. Medallion stamp, beneficiary change forms, escrow confirmation. My hands did not tremble anymore. They were busy making sure nothing could be taken without a dozen clear signatures. Back at the apartment by 3:30, the locksmith arrived. I paid cash and watched the man work. The slow, professional clack of new deadbolts sinking into frames, the metallic whisper of a new key. I labeled each lock with a small, neat sticker, front 1, back 2. The concierge logged the serials of the new hardware and emailed me a signed receipt. The timestamp read Sept 26, 1546. Little things become big things when put in order. That afternoon, I dug through file cabinets, 2010. Power of attorney with my signature and a 2012 brokerage transfer on death form that named a family LLC with Chris as its manager. The papers had my looping ink from a decade ago when I thought listing my son as manager was the definition of trust. I photocopied every page, initialed the copies, and fed the originals to Rachel. She drew a line through the old POA and said, "We decant these assets. We move them where they can't be grabbed." We also created the Astor Foundation that day, a small thing with a good name. Rachel typed a purpose clause: small, local grants, food pantry support, tree planting, educational stipends, no naming rights loud enough to make a headline. "Bench, not bust," she said with a half-smile. We funded its seed with a modest transfer from escrow, not everything needed to be flashy. The foundation got an EN, a bank account, and a mission statement that would one day tell better stories than a headline. I opened my laptop and made a folder called If. Inside, the photo of the pill bottle I took that night. The lab preliminary receipt with the technician's initials. Mr. Riley's signed statement, the USB hash Rachel logged. Screenshots of the bank's trusted party rule, showing the 5 million threshold. Copies of the POA and TOD forms. I uploaded it to a secure cloud and shared it with Rachel, and, because I wanted no one to say later that I hid from the buyer, with Victor Kane's compliance lead at Kane Systems. The subject line of the email was plain: evidence, Parkview Terrace incident. The attachment list read like an inventory of truth. I called the private lab. "We can prioritize prelims by this afternoon," the intake clerk said. I told her to hold nothing back. Chain of custody, sealed vial, signed transfer slip, small ritual steps that turn suspicion into proof. That evening, I wrote a letter to my son. Not sermon, not plea, direction. I put it in clean handwriting on a single sheet and sealed it in an envelope I labeled B. Inside, I described the trust structure I intended, the therapy requirement, the independent trustee, and the new rules for distributions. No direct cash, no collateral, support by criteria, not proximity. I slid another envelope across the table and labeled it A. Inside A, I placed a copy of Mr. Riley's statement and a note. "If you choose A, I will file these with the police and the DA." I placed the 2 envelopes on the kitchen counter for myself to look at, like chess pieces arranged against an opponent I still loved in pieces. One was law, one was mercy. Both were honest. At night, I stood on my balcony and watched the city polish itself for whatever came next. I had the lab call scheduled for the morning and a meeting with my banker at noon. I'd changed locks, frozen access, and told myself what my wife used to tell me in quiet moments. If you build it clean, it will stand. Tomorrow, I would sit with them again. This time, I would bring facts to a table where they had brought smiles. I had Mr. Riley, the medallion slip, the lab chain, and a folder labeled "if that would not be erased by excuses." I slept with the envelope B beneath my mattress because some kinds of courage, like a warm place to rest before they are used. I set 2 envelopes on linen like chess pieces. A for police, B for repair. Friday night, September 26th, Parkview Terrace again. I sat at the same table where the juice glass had nearly ended me. This time, I drank only water, the condensation sliding down the glass like a countdown. Chris walked in at 7:05, Laya right behind him, both carrying that performance smile people wear when they've rehearsed their lines. They weren't alone. A man in a blazer introduced himself as a care manager, code for a staged witness to paint me as confused. I let them take their seats, let the charade breathe for 2 minutes, then reached into my briefcase. I placed a single page on the table, sliding it toward Chris the way you'd slide a bill across a bar. Benzodiazepine, anticoagulant, chain of custody intact. Dated September 25th. My voice was calm. My son's face drained of color. On cue, Mr. Riley approached. He nodded to me, then looked directly at Chris. I saw what I saw. You tipped a vial into your father's drink. I wrote it down, signed it, and I'll repeat it under oath. The quartet's violins bent into a minor key, and for a moment, the whole restaurant felt like a courtroom without a gavel. I reached into my briefcase again and set 2 envelopes on the linen. A, I said, tapping the first, is police, tonight, video, witness, lab. I tapped the second. B is boundaries, written acceptance of the new trust rules. No direct asks for money ever again. Therapy for a year, practitioner approved by Rachel. All communication goes through counsel. Leah stretched a hand toward the envelopes, her nails catching the candlelight. I stopped her with a look. You don't get to handle my proof. The waiter arrived with plates we didn't touch. I told them they had until 8 mois. Then I left a tip that felt like a prayer for better days and walked into the September air. At 8:07, my phone buzzed. A text from Chris. B will be at your lawyer's 9 a.m. It read like surrender. But my gut said the night wasn't done counting. At 12:41 a.m., a concierge call. My door, a locksmith, and my son's jacket. I didn't sleep at home that night. Something in Chris's text, B will be at your lawyer's 9 a.m., felt too clean, too quick. So I checked into a quiet hotel under an alias I hadn't used in 10 years. Room 408, old carpet, no questions at the desk. I lay down in my clothes, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. Near 1 in the morning, my phone lit up with the building concierge's number. His voice was a mix of training and fear. Mr. Mercer, there's a locksmith at your door. He's with 2 people. One matches your son's description. Says it's an emergency repair. I sat up, my hand cold on the phone. Did they have written work orders? I asked. No, sir. We turned them away. Security camera logged it. Time-stamped at 12:41 a.m. I asked him to email me the incident report, signed and dated. He did within minutes. The PDF landed in my inbox with a still frame of Chris's jacket, navy, the one I bought him last Christmas, hunched against the hallway light. The blue painter's tape on the new strike plate glowed in the footage like fresh stitches. My locks had held. 5 minutes later, a text buzzed. If you insist on this, we'll petition for guardianship. Paperwork is easy. That wasn't panic, it was escalation. Rachel's reply was immediate. Logged, preserved. 3 words that tasted like steel. At 3:01 a.m., another knock. This time on my hotel door. Soft, deliberate. My son's voice bled through the wood. Dad, we can't do 9. Open the door. His tone was half plea, half threat. I didn't open. I stood there, breathing through the wood, and spoke like a man to weather. If you want 9, you'll show up on time. If you want to test me, remember A is still on the table. He tried another angle. The sale could collapse if buyers hear rumors about you being unstable. Think about it, I answered without hesitation. Compliance doesn't flinch at gossip. They flinch at poison. You're the rumor, not me. I could hear Leah's heels clicking against the tile, moving closer. Her voice slid under the door, honeyed and sharp. This isn't necessary. You're tired. We just want to make sure you're safe. Safe from what? I asked. From my own signature? From a glass of juice? There was a long silence, then footsteps toward the elevator. Before leaving, Chris muttered, "You don't want a courtroom." Neither do we. When the hall fell quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking but steady. I pulled out the envelope labeled B and added a line in pen. If you want forgiveness, bring a fact. By dawn, I hadn't closed my eyes. I just stared out the hotel window at the city's skyline, turning pale with morning. This wasn't a truce. It was rehearsal. Tomorrow we'd be back under lights, with paper, witnesses, and signatures. The real trial was coming. Their lawyer files at dawn, an elder concern petition painted in honey. Monday morning, September 29th, the city was barely awake when Rachel's email landed. Subject line, guardianship petition, expedited. Attached was a motion filed by Chris's attorney, pages thick with syrupy language. Words like paranoid, confused, financial exploitation. They wanted me painted as a doddering old man who couldn't tell juice from wine, numbers from dreams. Rachel called me immediately. They filed it fast. We expected it. Now we answer. Her voice was steady, but mine shook with the irony. My own son trying to save me from myself by taking everything from me. We spent the morning drafting our response. Exhibit A. The lab report from September 25th, notarized and signed, confirming the short-acting benzodiazepine. Exhibit B. Mr. Riley's sworn statement, complete with a sketch of the restaurant layout where he stood when he saw the vial tilt. Exhibit C, the building's incident report, time-stamped Sep 27, 12:41 a.m., when Chris and Leah tried to force a locksmith through my new deadbolts. Exhibit D, the bank's letter rescinding the trusted party designation. Stamped Sep 26, 11:42 a.m., the paper trail was my armor, and I had built it carefully, day by day. By 10:15 a.m., Rachel filed a cross-motion. Dismissal of guardianship with prejudice, protective order for my residence and accounts, and notice of our intent to seek referral to the DA. The clerk stamped it, the ink still wet when I touched the copy. Meanwhile, I was busy with tasks that mattered just as much. At noon, I finalized beneficiary changes at the Midtown branch, green medallion stamps pressed onto slips that turned trust into law. At 2:00 p.m., escrow confirmed forwarding of funds into the new structure, with Rachel as co-signer. By evening, the Astor Foundation had its EIN, its bylaws signed, and an independent trustee ready to administer. Each document, each signature, each receipt was a brick in a wall they couldn't climb. On Tuesday, September 30th, Rachel sat me down in her office. She handed me a yellow pad and said, "Practice answers. Keep them simple. Date, place, fact. No speeches." We rehearsed the judge's questions. "Why no police that night?" she asked, playing judge. "Because I wanted evidence first," I said, steady. She nodded. "That's the line. Stay with it." Mr. Riley joined us Wednesday morning. He went over his affidavit with the precision of a man who'd seen too many drunks, but never this. He described the glass, the vial, the angle of Chris's wrist. The chemist followed, explaining metabolites in plain language. "For a man on anticoagulants," she said, "this mix is not a prank. It's a collapse waiting to happen." That night, I ironed my navy suit until the creases looked like clean sentences. I laid out my cufflinks, the ones my wife had given me on our 25th anniversary. I wanted the judge to see a man who had built, who had planned, who had loved, not a victim, not a shadow. By Thursday, October 2nd, every piece was in place. The folders labeled A and B sat in Rachel's briefcase. Back now by stamped slips, notarized affidavits, and sealed lab reports. Friday, October 3rd, 9 a.m., Part 47, downtown Manhattan. They wanted a courtroom. They were about to get one. The clerk calls my name. Truth takes a microphone. Friday, October 3rd, Part 47, downtown Manhattan. The courtroom smelled of varnished benches and nerves. My son sat at the petitioner's table, Leah beside him, her sunglasses perched on her head like armor. Their lawyer rose first, speaking in tones of silk. "Your Honor, my client comes before you out of love and concern. His father, while once a brilliant businessman, now suffers confusion, paranoia, and susceptibility to exploitation. We seek guardianship for his safety." I kept my hands folded, listening, not blinking. Their lawyer painted me as a fragile relic, a man one invoice away from collapse. Chris nodded along, wearing the mask of a dutiful son. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have believed him myself. Then Rachel stood, calm, grounded. She lifted a folder and placed it on the evidence table. "Exhibit A," she said, sliding it toward the judge. "Lab report, September 25th, confirming presence of short-acting benzodiazepine in Mr. Mercer's drink." The judge scanned the page, lips pressed thin. "Exhibit B," Rachel continued. "Sworn affidavit of Mr. Riley, restaurant security, notarized. He observed petitioner tilting a vial into respondent's juice." Mr. Riley rose from the gallery, raised his hand, and testified. He described the table, the clear-capped vial, the exact moment he leaned in to warn me. His words were steady, unshakable. "Exhibit C," Rachel said, laying down another document, "Building Incident Report. September 27th, 12:41 a.m. Attempted forced entry by petitioner with locksmith. Denied access by concierge. Video attached." The clerk clicked play on the screen. There was Chris's jacket in grainy clarity, hunched in frustration outside my new deadbolts. Finally, Rachel placed Exhibit D, the bank's rescission letter of trusted party authority, date stamped September 26th. "Your Honor," she said, "these are not the acts of a confused old man. These are the acts of a father forced to defend himself with facts." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Mercer, why didn't you call the police immediately on the night in question?" I rose, steadying my voice. "Because I wanted facts first, Your Honor. I have them now." The words rang like hammer blows. The chemist took the stand next. She explained the compounds found in my juice. "For a man on anticoagulants," she said, looking squarely at the judge, "this combination could cause severe disorientation, sudden collapse, even death." Silence spread across the room like a heavy curtain. Rachel closed her case. "We move to dismiss this petition with prejudice. We request a protective order for Mr. Mercer's residence and accounts. And we note for the record, Your Honor, that these exhibits are appropriate for referral to the district attorney." The judge set her pen down. She looked from Chris to me, then back to the exhibits. "Petition denied," she said. "Protective order granted. Referral for potential criminal action is noted." Chris slumped. Laya gripped his arm, but her face was pale. The words "petition denied" echoed in my head like church bells. For the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fill completely. As we left the courtroom, reporters gathered outside the steps, shouting questions I didn't answer. Justice had spoken in ink and evidence, not headlines. I had walked into that room accused of frailty. I walked out carrying proof of survival. The choice ahead was mine: stop at protection or press further into punishment. Justice had opened a door. I had to decide how far to walk through it. Mercy isn't weakness. It's a contract with conditions. The courthouse steps were crowded, cameras flashing like lightning strikes against stone. Reporters shouted, but I walked straight through, my navy suit buttoned, my folder pressed against my side like a shield. Inside it were the 4 exhibits that had just saved my life. Chris trailed behind, his lawyer whispering fast, Laya tugging at his sleeve. He looked older and younger at once. 12 years old in his shame, 40 in his hunger. Rachel pulled me aside. "We can file the criminal complaint today. Referral is in motion anyway. It's your call. Do we press now or hold?" I asked for 1 hour. She frowned but agreed. We sat in the hallway outside Part 47, where the echoes of other families' battles hung in the air. Chris stood a few feet away, staring at the tiled floor as if it could open and swallow him. I motioned him over. He came, cautious, like a boy approaching a father's belt. I opened my folder and handed him a single envelope, B, the same one from Parkview Terrace, only now with teeth. "These are the terms," I told him, my voice even. "No direct asks for money. A full year of therapy with a practitioner Rachel approves. All distributions through the independent trustee. You respect the protective order. You respect my house. You respect the line." Laya opened her mouth, but I held up a finger. "This isn't yours to answer." Chris stared at the paper, reading each line like it was written in fire. Then I gave him one new condition. "You will write an apology. Not to me, to Mr. Riley who stopped you. To the concierge who turned you away at 12:41 a.m. That apology will be signed, dated, witnessed, and delivered to my attorney. If you can't respect strangers who saved my life, you'll never respect me." He blinked hard, eyes wet, jaw clenched. "And if I don't?" I tapped the other envelope still in my folder. "Then I deliver Exhibit A through D to the DA tomorrow morning, and you face it all in a criminal courtroom. Your choice by 5 p.m. He shook his head like he wanted to spit but couldn't find the words. I leaned closer. "You didn't lose me, you gave me away. I just chose who to belong to next." By 3 Rachel and I finalized filings, updated will, pour-over provisions to the trust, second wire to the Astor Foundation, $25,000 earmarked for a food pantry on 10th Avenue, $15,000 for new trees along a battered stretch in Queens. Quiet work, no plaques, no press releases. My wife would have approved. At 4:53 p.m., my phone buzzed. Rachel forwarded me a PDF, Chris's signature, witnessed and dated. His scrawl sat under the words, "I accept the conditions without reservation." An attached note to Mr. Riley and the building staff followed, clumsy but real. "Thank you for protecting my father when I did not." "I'm sorry," I exhaled. Not relief, not joy. Something quieter. Something like survival with a little dignity left. Now justice wasn't a gavel or a cell. It was a fence around my peace, tall enough to keep the wolves out. Peace didn't come with the wire. It came with the lock that clicked after. A week slid by like a cast hardening. No drama, no midnight knocks, just the quiet sound of systems holding. The protective order pinned to my refrigerator felt less like paper and more like a lock on my lungs finally opening. October air tasted different, cooler, a hint of leaves breaking down into soil. I was back in my apartment, coffee black, no scotch at night, no chair wedged under the door. Every morning I opened the slim folder with my court copy packet, lab report, affidavits, bank slips, incident logs. Not because I needed to, but because the sight of neat dates and signatures was like a small prayer that reality still existed outside manipulation. I wrote my first letter as chairman of the Astor Foundation. Simple, plain type. Support quiet places, small grants, no red carpets. I authorized the first checks. $25,000 to a pantry on 10th Avenue, $15,000 for saplings and soil repair in Queens. Not big enough for a headline, big enough to matter. On October 5th, I took the subway to Riverside Park, sat on a bench without a plaque, drinking coffee, watching the river carry away things I couldn't. An older couple asked where I bought my watch. I told them a story about time I could finally afford. It felt like telling the truth for the first time in weeks. That afternoon I walked back into Parkview Terrace, not for dinner but for thanks. Mr. Riley was on duty. I shook his hand, left an envelope for the night crew. He nodded once, the way people do when they've seen everything and still choose decency. On October 10th, I sent Chris a single text. Therapy schedule confirmed. Minutes later, a screenshot appeared on my phone. Tuesday, 6 p.m., appointment booked. Not forgiveness, but proof. Not talk, but time, place, date. Sweet revenge moment. If this story matters to you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, city and state. Because these next lines aren't about revenge. They're about the math of boundaries. I closed my phone and looked out over the river. The buyer's compliance lead sent a short email. "Congrats on your clean clothes." Clean, that was the word. Not free. Not finished, clean. And for the first time since a guard whispered to me under lantern light, I believed it. The DA calls. I have to decide if mercy still fits. Day 15, after the hearing, I was drinking my second cup of black coffee when Rachel rang. "The DA's office wants your statement," she said. Referral came through the judge. "They'll pursue if you sign." I sat at my desk, looking at the envelope still marked A, thick with affidavits, receipts, the USB. Proof that could bend my son's life into a shape he couldn't stand back up from. Rachel didn't push. She knew silence was sometimes a client's only weapon. By noon, I told her, we hold. 30 days. If he honors the contract, we wait. If he slips, we file. Mercy wasn't softness. Mercy was offense with conditions. That same week, the independent trustee sent the first official letter to Chris. It laid out distribution parameters, education, health, maintenance, support. No direct cash, no loans, no collateralization. Clean legal language, stamped and signed. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one saying no. The system said it for me. Meanwhile, the Astor Foundation made its first transfers. $25,000 wired to the pantry on 10th Avenue. $15,000 to the Parks Department for saplings and soil repair in Queens. I signed the disbursement sheets with a pen that didn't shake. Small acts, cleanly recorded, felt more powerful than any grand gesture I'd ever made with millions. On October 20th, Rachel forwarded me an email from Lyra. She wanted to revisit the no direct asks clause. Rachel's reply was one line: protective order in place. Communications through counsel only. I almost smiled reading it. Boundaries at last weren't mine alone to hold. Nights were easier. I walked along 72nd Street, counting doorways and dogs, no longer glancing over my shoulder. At home, I slept without the chair under the hotel door, no phantom footsteps in the hall. The locks clicked with the kind of finality you can believe in. On day 29, at 7:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. A photo came through, a therapy attendant slip dated with Chris's scrawl across the bottom. Proof of one session, maybe the first of many. I studied the image, not sure if it was contrition or compliance. Maybe it didn't matter, Mercy had a shape. And for the first time, it seemed to be holding. I used to name buildings. Now I water trees nobody will credit me for. October 31st, a Friday, I stood in Queens with a plastic watering can in my hand. The Astor Foundation's first project was underway, saplings staked along a wind-battered block near Roosevelt Avenue. Volunteers in old sneakers laughed as they pressed soil around roots. A boy no taller than my hip asked, "Did you plant these?" I crouched down, knees groaning, and told him the truth. No, I just made sure nobody can cut them down. There was no plaque, no ribbon, no speeches. That was the point. Quiet legacy, not loud monuments. I watched water sink into the soil and thought about how much of my life I had spent chasing recognition, only to learn peace lived in the things that carried no name. On the way home, I passed Parkview Terrace. The quartet was tuning up for the dinner crowd, strings bending into the hum of a Friday night. I stood outside the glass unseen, watching another family clink glasses, a father raising a toast to children who looked at him with the kind of trust I used to take for granted. Their laughter drifted out, as if it belonged to a different universe. Maybe it did. My phone buzzed. A photo from Chris. His feet propped on a therapist's coffee table, a notepad in the corner of the frame. Caption, week 4. For once, no excuses, no asks. Just proof. I typed back 3 words. Keep your feet. Short, steady, the kind of advice I wish I'd given earlier. That evening, the DA's office left a message checking if I wanted to press charges. I stared at the blinking red light on my phone, then erased the message. Justice had already been served in a courtroom and on paper. I didn't need prison bars to add punctuation. I walked to Riverside Park and sat on the same nameless bench, the one that asked for nothing except my weight. Leaves rattled in the wind like a quiet applause for someone else. In the end, revenge wasn't the point. Boundaries were, justice was, and peace was learning when to close a door without locking it. My last line is the one I keep close. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. I just chose who to belong to next. 2 months later, the city moved on, but I was still learning how to live in it again. The Astor Foundation sent me its first quarterly report, typed, stamped, modest. 20 families fed, 30 children's coats purchased, a row of young maples standing straighter in Queens. No one outside the recipients knew my name, and that was the gift. Chris was still attending therapy. Rachel forwarded me proof of his sessions, receipts stamped, appointments kept. He hadn't called, not once. The silence between us was an ache, but an honest one. Better than the poison of false closeness. One morning, I walked into a bank branch to set up a small scholarship fund in my wife's name. The clerk didn't know my story. To him, I was just another man with papers and a pen. But as I signed the agreement, I felt the clean line of choice, money transformed into something no one could manipulate. Later, I visited Riverside Park again, the same bench without a plaque. I watched strangers walk their dogs, children chase pigeons, couples share coffee. No one knew me, no one asked. For the first time in years, I felt invisible in the best possible way. My phone buzzed. A single-line email from Chris's therapist. Client attended all 4 sessions this month. Progress noted. I closed it without reply. Therapy wasn't forgiveness, but it was proof of effort. Proof mattered more than apologies. That evening, I wrote one last letter. Not to Chris, not to Rachel, but to the foundation board. Keep it simple. Help quietly. Measure success in trees planted and meals served, not plaques or speeches. I signed my name, folded it, and sealed it. In the end, revenge had never been about destroying my son. It was about building something he couldn't touch, something no vile or forged signature could undo. I locked the envelope in the foundation's file cabinet, closed the drawer, and walked into the cool night. Closing line. Legacies don't live in bloodlines. They live in boundaries.